Mr. President, I really believe you can tell a lot about an administration's priorities based on the people that they put in place in each location. That's true for every administration. There are more than 300 million Americans. Many of them are passionate about serving our nation. We have many great federal employees that spend their entire life serving our nation. So there are a lot of individuals to be able to choose from, to be able to put in different administration roles, but their background tells you a lot about what the priority is and the purpose is. For instance, I would say Javier Becerra, who's leading HHS, who has no healthcare background at all, who's an attorney, now leading our nation's healthcare focus. The major issue for him, he was the most vocal proponent of abortion while he was in Congress, while he was leading as Attorney General in California. He was an activist pushing abortion in every single country, even suing other states when they limited abortion as the Attorney General of California. He was an activist about abortion. He would increase abortions in America. That was a major reason he was put in that spot with HHS. Why else would you put an activist attorney leading our nation's healthcare area? You can say the same thing. Some of the major nominations that have come in for DOJ, Kristen Clark, Anita Gupta, both of them are outspoken proponents of the defund the police movement. Now they're actually in the Department of Justice. Kristen Clark wrote, "We must invest less in police and more in social workers." She also wrote, "We must invest less in police, more in social supports for our schools, less in police, more in mental health aid." It was the main focus of the defund the police movement that she continued to be able to drive in her op-eds and her writings. That's why she was selected, clearly, to be able to go to the Department of Justice. Anita Gupta did the same thing. She said it's critical for state and local leaders to decrease police budgets and the scope, role, and responsibility of police in our lives. There's a reason that she's actually selected to be able to be in that spot. It matches with the priorities and the values of the administration. Same thing whether you look at defense. National defense, Alexandria Baker, when she was put to be Undersecretary of Defense, said she's outspoken and believes that climate change is the leading national security challenge that we face. The leading national security challenge. I'm sure the folks in Russia and Ukraine would be glad to be able to hear that our leading challenge currently is climate change in the Department of Defense. Listen, these are all sets of priorities when you look at it and you look at the different individuals. And it's the same when we look at what's happening right now with Ms. Sarah Bloom Raskin being nominated to be the Vice Chair of Supervision at the Federal Reserve. This is no just ordinary position. The Vice Chair of Supervision of the Federal Reserve will have an immense amount of regulatory and supervisory power to push her agenda and to control many aspects of the federal economy. She's in lockstep with President Biden's agenda to take on fossil fuels. The problem is the direction that she's trying to lead the Federal Reserve is to be able to engage in picking winners and losers, not just from a policy aspect, but from a capital aspect from the Federal Reserve. This is not something I'm just writing in to be able to say. This is something she's stated over and over and over again, that the Federal Reserve should be able to reach in and to be able to make it more difficult to get capital for anyone who handles fossil fuels. Why is that important to us? Well, because 70% of the energy in the United States is fossil fuel related. So what happens suddenly if it gets harder to be able to do natural gas investment? It gets harder to do oil investment in the United States. Well, two things happen with that. It's pretty straightforward. We import more energy and the prices go up. That's what happens. Because we're not going to have a decreasing amount in the foreseeable future. That's not me just saying that. That's President Biden's U.S. Energy Information Administration. If you look at the charts and details that they put out about what's going to happen for oil and natural gas usage, they would forecast all the way up to 2050. It's going to be about what it is. Worldwide, it's going to go up significantly. But in the United States, we're still going to need oil and natural gas at about the level we're at right now, at least through 2050. Now, we can talk a lot about carbon capture, and I'm all in on that conversation. But making it harder and more expensive to actually get oil and natural gas, while we know we're going to need the same amount or more, who pays for that? Well, consumers do. So let's look at the simple facts on this. January of 2020, before COVID starts striking worldwide, natural gas prices $2.02 a unit. Natural gas prices in January of 2022, the latest number we have, $4.38. Let's look at gasoline for every person that's actually filling up their tank. Go back to, let's say, February 2019, well before the pandemic. We'll just compare February to February. Get before that time period, $2.39 a gallon. Today, average price, $3.47 a gallon. What are we experiencing? Policy pressure on limiting access, and what's happening right now is Sarah Bloom Raskin has been nominated to step into the Federal Reserve, and her primary issue is make it even harder. When our gasoline prices have gone up almost 50% in the last year, I would have to say this administration is intentionally finding ways to be able to make the price of energy more expensive, to be able to push people to other energy sources. Who feels the pain of that? Every single American. I wish I could just say this was hyperbole, but let me read just a few things to you. During the COVID pandemic, the Federal Reserve was stepping in and trying to stabilize companies around the country that were struggling and that were challenged. And we all know plenty of companies that were struggling and were challenged. One of the things the Federal Reserve did, like they did for every other company, was also stabilize oil and gas companies. Because if those oil and gas companies tank, that means we've got to get energy from overseas in the days ahead. So they did what they did to every other entity. They were neutral in it and said, if you're a company that's providing an infrastructure, we're going to provide you access to resources the same as everyone else. Except Sarah Bloom Raskin wrote this: the Federal Reserve buying troubled assets from the fossil fuel industry is dangerous, she wrote. She said it's bad for the economy, bad for the environment, bad for all of us. If Sarah Bloom Raskin was in the Federal Reserve during the COVID pandemic, we would have likely seen multiple energy companies across the United States collapse for lack of capital. And right now, we would be buying even more gasoline and even more oil or natural gas from Russia instead. I'm not sure how that solves the problem, but her priority is this simple statement she's made: financial regulators must reimagine their own role so they can play their part in the broader reimagining of our economy. Now, I don't know how many people that I would run into in Oklahoma that would say, you know who I want reimagining our economy? Not the free market, but someone in D.C., I'd be interested in them at their office working with the capital assets across the country and managing who gets access to capital and who doesn't. I'd like to have someone I've never met in D.C. reimagining our economy based on their preferences. I don't meet many people like that in Oklahoma. They want a fair playing field, they want a level playing field, and they want free markets. Do we want a clean economy? Absolutely we do. I would challenge anyone in this chamber to look at the energy breakdown in Oklahoma and compare it to your state's energy breakdown and the amount of renewables that we use in our state versus what you're using in yours. We're passionate about a clean energy future, but we're also realists in the process and not trying to drive the price up for every person in the process. Maria Robinson has also been nominated to be Assistant Secretary of the Office of Electricity. I met with her earlier this week. Ms. Robinson's from Massachusetts. She's vocally opposed natural gas pipelines coming into New England. She was pretty clear that she understands they use dirtier home heating oil in the Northeast, but she doesn't want natural gas pipelines coming in. But she didn't seem to oppose when a Russian tanker pulled in and offloaded natural gas into Boston Harbor. So literally buying natural gas from the Russians, not from the United States, didn't seem to be an issue. But she did make this statement: I would certainly be a part of the group of folks who oppose any new gas pipelines. In my conversation with her, I asked her about, I just picked a day. January the 16th, 2022 is the day that I picked just in our conversation. I said that particular day in New England, 24% of the energy generation was from fuel oil. over 30% was from natural gas, and 8% was from renewables. 8. That particular day, 24% from home heating oil, over 30% natural gas, 8% from renewables. So my simple question was, what are you planning to substitute in that? How's this going to work? Her response was, well, in our area in New England, we're working on connecting our grid more to other parts of the country to deliver electricity to us. What that really means, we don't like windmills. We don't like to look at them in Boston Harbor. We don't like offshore wind. We want windmills built in Oklahoma, and you guys just ship us our electricity so we can flick on the light. Ms. Laura Daniels Davis. She's been nominated to be Assistant Secretary for the Office of Land and Minerals Management. She's currently in a role already with DOI. In her role in DOI, she's already made the change that routine permitting decisions that are typically made in the field to expedite process of making permits, those have all been pulled up to her desk in Washington, D.C., where they've slowed down dramatically. The clear signal was, if you want to do any oil and gas development, it's got to come through me, and it's not going to be rapid like it used to be. So if you're going to invest capital, just understand your capital is whether I make that decision or not. They've not held a single onshore oil and gas lease sale, even though they're required by law to do so. Just ignored it for a year and said, we're studying it. There's also a 5-year leasing plan that's required for offshore oil and gas development. So while they've cut off offshore, there's a 5-year lease plan that has to be put in place that's due by June of this year. So far, we have no signal they've even begun that, and it takes months to be able to develop. Why are these individuals being selected for these positions? Because it's very clear they have certain priorities in place. They were selected because they're going to block out anything that deals with oil and gas, and their focus is to cut it off right now. Cut off pipelines, cut off new leasing, cut off offshore leasing, make it harder to be able to get access to capital. All of that will raise prices for American consumers. Today, it was announced the inflation rate in the United States is now at 7.5%. It continues to rise month after month after month. I would say to you, that is directly connected to a group of policies that have been put in place to make energy more expensive, and it is, to make it more difficult to be able to do a lot of things in permitting and such, and it is. Yes, we're recovering from COVID, I'm very aware. But the policies that are put in place are also driving this. We have 2 million people that have illegally crossed the border last year. 2 million. That's an enormous number. That 2 million number did not happen by just the calendar and by COVID. Policies were put in place that have led to a flood of people illegally crossing our border. Policies are being put in place by individuals that are directly leading to 7.5% inflation now in our country. Can I say to you, half of the Americans alive have never in their lifetime experienced inflation like they're experiencing right now. Half of the Americans alive do not know what 7.5% inflation is going to be to them personally, but they're learning quickly because what they thought they were going to buy last month, they can no longer afford this month, and it doesn't look better next month. And if we don't deal with real consequences for people, including who is put into different positions, this never gets better. I yield the floor.